Hey everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how to create a web application, getting it started using the React library, a front-end framework. With that, there are a few other pieces that we need to add. And if you're just beginning your journey learning web development, as I have as a learner, there's plenty that you're going to need to know. One of those things being what is an application and what does the construction of an application entail. And I'm going to give you just the gist of what I understand by it and how an application is really just a series of views with certain properties being passed between them, which in turn shows a viewer or, in web dev language, a client, different things through the web browser. So how do we create an application? Well, these days, one of the ways people are doing it are by way of what are called single page applications. So here are two that I've made. This is one called Remy Gets a Smartphone. And a single page application will take an initial download from the server and only shift out certain views that you see as a user depending on input. Like if, for example, I click a link about, then we'll have the middle section of this application change its view. So the rendering of what we're seeing on the screen is really dependent upon the input we're giving it. And a key part of a single page application is basically having a middle section which shifts and then a header and a footer which stay consistent. So we have a header here with what's called the nav bar with the drop down menu and then this picture of a cat. And then we have a footer here which stays consistent too. Notice how when I shift between tabs, the top and bottom stay the same, but the middle content shifts. I have another single page application that I've built out in a similar way with the header and the footer staying consistent. I have some other little features in here. This one is way more built out than the one I showed earlier, but the concept is the same with the middle content shifting out in relation to the input we're giving the application. In this sense here, clicking on links. So you can see how we have the switching out of a middle component. So how do we begin doing this? Well, there are quite a few steps if you're going from scratch, but if you want to get a quick start, what one way you can do it is by using what is called a scaffolding for what React. And in this case, we're going to be using something called Create React App. And how do we begin? So step one, create a folder on your desktop. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rename this one just the demo folder in this case. You can call yours whatever you want, or I'll just call it demo actually, just for ease. From here, you're going to move into your terminal. Now, before I begin this next step, this tutorial relies on you having also set up your computer for some application development, and that setup specifically it involves installing a package manager. And what that means is that you're able to import in code that people have already pre-written to build out your application. And these pre-written chunks are really essential because they can speed up the development process. And we need a way to pull that information quickly through the terminal here. And I'm holding it. I'm using a Mac, by the way, for those of you who are curious and it's not obvious to you. But once you have done this, you'll be able to ask for certain modules to be installed into your project and declare a new project just outright. So the way to do that uh, is going to be npx. Well, first of all, we're going to go to the folder that I've created. So I'm going to go cd desktop ls to see what kind of folders I have on the desktop if you really want to see that. I'm going to go to the demo folder, which I had just created earlier. So cd demo ls, nothing presently in the folder. Now, ls, for those of you who are new to working with the terminal, is list services. We have currently nothing in this folder, and I'm going to open it up for you just to take a look there. Now, from here, what we're going to do is we're going to do npx create react app, and then we're going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this demo. This will be the name of my application, but by default, it's also going to be the name of the folder. So once you type that in, you're going to see that Create React App goes ahead and downloads all these modules from the web using a Node package manager. And that in turn will be installed within this folder here when it's done. Now, looks like it's almost finished up, and there it is. You can see that we have a demo folder. If we open up the demo folder, you'll see that there are actually still things that are being loaded up, but we have folders appearing, which will be used, the components will be used to build out an application, just like what I showed you earlier with these two apps, both of which were scaffolded out with Create React App. So we're just going to give it a moment. In the meantime, what I'm going to do though is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up a new window. And the reason for doing this will become apparent a little bit later, but I'm going to go ahead and move to the same directory that I'm installing packages in right now. So I'm going to go again, CD desktop, and then I'm going to go to CD demo. And at this point, it really is important that I hold up a little bit and I wait for the React app to install. So I'm going to pause it here and wait for it to be done. All right, so now that my Create React app has finished loading and it looks like all the files have been downloaded, to begin building out my application, you'll see that the terminal prompts me with how I can type in yarn start to go ahead and view the deployment of the application as is. Now, what is yarn? Yarn is a package manager. As I mentioned earlier, there are two that you'll come across often, Node Package Manager and Yarn, um, both of which will have to be installed and both of which I'll put the links to in the description to this video, so you can go ahead and set that up. But let's go ahead in one of the terminal windows that I open. Let's go ahead and type in yarn start and see what happens. Oh, of course. So important here is if you ls right now, you'll notice that there is a demo folder. So we're going to have to actually cd into that. So cd demo, and then we ls, and you'll see that there are all the files that are listed in the folder right here. Now we'll go ahead and type in yarn start, and you'll go ahead and see how the terminal loads up the scripts, and we'll have a browser window pop up. And very soon from our local server on at this address 3000, we're going to see our React application as it was scaffolded out by Create React App. Now, as it's loading, I just want to talk to you all a little bit just about just web development. And this is somewhat of a new thing for me too. And some of you listening may be doing this for learning a skill for a job. Some of you may just want to deploy something online, kind of like I did, and want to get started with the pieces to development quickly so you can start creating and launch something and put it live, which is extremely exciting. So what I want to highlight before I just really delve deep into this is you can do a lot with very little. And the pieces that I'm going to show you are really just the bare fundamentals that you'll need to implement a static website where you can switch between what are called views and I will just now jump into it. So here we have our React application. We have this spinning logo. We have some text and we have a Learn React header. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at the code now. So I'm going to shift this browser window away, and we're going to leave this terminal window open and running. So that way, as we work with our code and we type in new commands, it'll render automatically within this web browser, and we'll be able to see those changes by flipping back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead now in this other terminal window. Again, notice how I've CD'd into the directory. I'm going to list the services here, and I have to go into the demo folder. ls again. And now I'm going to type in code dot. Now, code dot will open up Visual Studio Code, which is the development environment of choice for me. There are many others that you can choose from, and the code dot is something that you'll want to set up with your own computer. The other alternative is just to go up old school and open up Visual Code and then file open and open it. But it's a little bit of a long-winded way. So I've done it through the terminal to go directly to this folder that I've been working on and have that immediately installed within Visual Code. And let's go ahead and look at some of the files. So we have a file structure already built out for us with Create React App. So if I go to app.js, you'll see that there's some stuff here that looks very familiar. I'm going to take that away. You'll see that we have app.js code and save to reload and learn React. So just that text alone, let's go ahead and compare it to the view we're seeing in the browser. Save to reload and learn React. So that gives us a pretty good hint that the information from that file is being directly rendered to this view here, and that gives us a good starting point for where to kick off our development work. So first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to delete some of this stuff. Actually, we're going to take away all this middle section here, including the header, and we're going to leave the div right there. Now, instead of just leaving it blank, I'm going to go ahead and type in hello world, and then I'm going to save it. Notice now when I go back to my application, it immediately renders hello world there. Um, Now, an important part of this all, if you're kicking off again your journey learning React, is you're going to need to learn some HTML and CSS to be able to work effectively with React. And you're definitely going to have to up your JavaScript skills. I'm again only showing you the very basics, and there is so much. But to get you started in the interest of maybe sparking some success early, let's stick to our plan with just sort of assuming that you have some of these fundamentals in place already. And if you don't, why not just follow along and try it out too? So I have Hello World in there right now. Now, again, when we go back to our single page applications, we have a top section and a bottom section down here, which stay consistent. And we have a middle view which shifts depending on user input. That was something early on in this tutorial that I had spoken about. We're going to try to simulate that with just some basic text right now. So to begin, we're going to go ahead and implement a file structure for our application, a very basic one. Within the src source folder, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a components folder. All right, there you go. In the components folder, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a series of files. Now, the first one that I'll do is create a main component. So I'm going to go ahead and call this main component. Okay. And in the main component, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start describing what I want that component to look like. And it's going to be very similar to Hello World in this case, but let's start building it out. So we're going to do import React from React. And then we're going to do function main. And in here, we're going to return a value which will be a div. And in it, it's going to say hello world. And we also need to make sure that we export what we're describing in this file to be used elsewhere in our program. So we're going to do export default main. Okay, so from here, let's go ahead now and jump back into the app file, going back and forth between the two, but I'm going to app.js. I'm going to delete away some of the stuff that we don't need now, but we're going to go ahead and import in this main component. So we're going to go ahead and say import main from dot components and main component. Now we can now use this within the app.js file, and we can go ahead and just call that component we just built out, the main component, like so, main. Notice how automatically within my development environment code, um, you know, basically my IDE, it automatically goes ahead and puts a closing tag main here, but we can have self-closing tags too, like so, by just putting in a slash bracket. So we only need one main right there. So if I go ahead and I save this now, and I go back and look at my React app again, we again have hello world, slightly rendered slightly differently. We can get into talking about styling. In fact, I encourage you to look at HTML and CSS styling for the development of your applications, because you're not just going to want your stuff placed willy-nilly all over the browser screen, but it's put it in the top left in this case. So Why I wanted to show you this though is we created a component in a separate file and we've imported it in and we have rendered it in a very similar way um, within a file. So we have our main component. And the main component is now where we are going to declare the meat of our application, what we will call a single page application, where the header and the footer will stay consistent and the middle chunk will change. So in order to do that, we need to build out a header and a footer component and then some kind of views that we want to change. In here in components, go ahead and create a header component.js. I'm also going to go ahead now right away and create a footer component.js. Working first with the header, I'm going to import React from React. And then I'm going to go ahead and declare this header component as a function. We will call this a functional component. As you learn more React, you'll also have to know about class-based components. The reason being sometimes you'll want to include certain properties within your component that you can't with a functional component unless you use certain add-ons, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. So we're going to go ahead and declare this header component. So function header, and we're going to return a value, and this will be a div again, since we're just really trying to keep this simple. Excuse the auto rendering with my sloppy typing, and we're going to say header component, and we need to make sure we export this. So export default header. All right, so we're going to save that, and we're going to use this as a template also for creating our footer. I'm going to paste it into the footer file. I'm going to go ahead and change what we call this function, footer. I'm going to call this footer component and default export footer. So in much the same way we imported in the main component into app.js, we're now going to go ahead and import in those two files into the main component here. And let me backtrack a bit. In much the same way that we imported in the main component into the app.js file, we are going to do the same for main component. So we're going to do import header from dot header component and import footer from footer component. So at this point now, we can go ahead and use these within the main file. So let's go ahead and try that out. So header, and I'm going to make this a self-closing tag right away. And I'm going to go ahead and put footer, and I'm going to make this a self-closing tag right away. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. So right away, we do have an error. Our IDE has picked up something in red, but let's go ahead and take a look at it and see what it says. So failed to compile. Parsing error. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Did you want a JSX fragment? Well, yes, because there is a rule with React that you need to have an enclosing parent tag over your elements. And in many cases, that can be a div, or it could be a React fragment. So I'm going to go React dot fragment, close it out, and I need to wrap what I typed earlier with that, with the React fragment tag. So notice how I place it within it, and then I'm going to save it again. And now when I go back to my application, you'll see we have header component, hello world, and footer component. Expected based on the way we typed out the code and how it's sandwiched. Hello world is sandwiched between header and footer. But what we're really shooting for is what is between header and footer shifting as we click links. But I think that we can represent that in an even simpler way. So going back to the applications that I showed you earlier, let's look at this one, Remy gets a smartphone. Let's take a look at the URL up here. If I go ahead and I go to the home component, notice how home shifts. Also the content shifts. As I go into artwork, notice how the content in the middle shifts. Notice how the URL shifts. We need a way to indicate what view is being shown and have that be within the URL in the browser. That will be the way that we can control the flow of our single page application. And for that, we need to install some add-ons to the Create React app to do it. And to do that, we're going to be installing something called React Router DOM. So let's begin that journey. So in order to do it first, we're going to have to think about what we want to switch it between. Let's see, we have about and home on mine. So let's go ahead and think about with this application we're building out right now, how we want to have an about component. And then we also want to have a home component. You could have as many components as you want. Um, a formality, a convention, if you will, is to give it a capital letter at the beginning if you're going to be talking about a component. But let's keep it on track. So with the home component, I'm going to go ahead and do import React from React, and I'm going to declare it as a functional component. So I'm going to do function home. In here, I'm going to return a div again, just in the interest of keeping this as simple as I possibly can. And this is going to say home. All right, and we're going to go default export home. Okay. Oh, export default home. My bad. Okay. So now that we have that in place, let's go ahead and use this also as the template for creating stuff in the About Us component. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in a copy of the code that I had created earlier. Going back again, copy it, and I'm going to go to About, paste it, and I'm going to name this About. I'm going to go ahead and change what's in the div to About, and then I'm going to export the name of this component, which is About in this case. So now that this is all done, let's go to the main component and import these in. We're going to need to work with them. So import about from dot slash, going out of the file we're currently in and looking within the directory for about component, and then import home from dot home component. And now what I'll do, just to show you guys that this is working, and it is good to test out your work as you go, not do everything full blast, like hammer out a bunch of code and then load it up and hope that everything works. Maybe you're just a savant and it does work, but I think it's good to go in baby steps because chances are sometimes there are errors and we all make mistakes. So let's go ahead and render these two components just on top of each other. So about slash, okay, and then I'm going to do home slash. So we have this mishmash of components all on top of each other. We're going to save it and we're going to go back to our browser and we're going to look at that application. And you'll see we have header component, about, home, and footer component. So we're now going to shift this so we're only going to have about or home in between header or footer, and we need to install an additional add-on to create React app, and that add-on is React Router DOM. So how are we going to do it? We're going to use the terminal. We're going to go to this terminal window here and making sure that we're in our file directory demo in this case. I'm going to do yarn add React Router DOM. Boom. All right. So you'll see that the package manager goes ahead and pulls those from the web into our project. You may get a few warnings. You're going to want to read those and sort through those at you're in your own time to optimize your application and make sure everything's functioning well before you deploy it live. But there we go. It's fully loaded. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at what that means now. So in my CoVS stuff here on the left, I'm going to look at the package.json, which shows me what kinds of dependencies are needed to run my application. You'll see that we now have React Router DOM here, which we just installed. React app installs all this stuff. Now, if you were to go from scratch, you would need to go ahead and by hand pick, cherry pick these things and put them in a file directory and structure to launch your application. So Create React App is a scaffolding to create an application quickly, and to kind of remove you from the groundwork, which is important to know about, but sometimes you just want to get your project moving quickly. And for many of us, our motivation may be to deploy something creative, and getting bogged down in file structure may be just a hindrance aside from what we want to do. So it really makes things easier. So we have React Router DOM installed, and now I'm going to show you some of the files. So all these files will be in the node modules, and I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to React Router DOM. Scrolling down, all the way down to the bottom. So React Router DOM. And here we are, React Router DOM. So as I open it up, I'm going to show you some of the modules in here. We have hash router, we have link.js, we have some other things like match path. These are all files that we have pulled into our project by way of the package manager that will allow us to create what are called routes to display the different views. So why I wanted to show you this is because we are going to be pulling some of these files specifically into some of our code to do things. So going back to the main component. In the main component, we're going to go ahead and we are going to import now switch, route, redirect, and with router. All files that exist within that directory I had showed you earlier. Now, notice how we're putting these within curly brackets. Now, the reason is because within React Router DOM, there are multiple modules you can pull from. There isn't a default, okay? There isn't just one. So we have to describe and be specific about what we want. So we have to pull it in within these curly brackets. So from here now, we're going to start doing some pretty interesting stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll leave it there for the moment. We're going to first use root. So we're going to go ahead and create a few routes. Okay, and I'm going to make this a self-closing tag. And we're going to say in here, there is going to be a parameter. We're going to say path. And here we get to declare what path we want this to be called in our URL. We're going to say we want it to be /home as a string. And what component do we want that path to lead to? Again, the attribute is called component. We want it to go to our home component. Okay? Notice how I put it in squiggly brackets. The reason being is we want that to be the implementation of JavaScript there rather than the React specific language called JSX, which we are actually formatting here. But again, I don't want to bog you down too much with details. Let's get to the meat of just creating. So then we're going to go ahead and create another route. Going to be path. We're going to call this one about and component. And we're going to call this one about. Well, not call it. I mean, we got to call it. All right, so we have two routes set up. Now, what do we want to do? We want to be able to switch between those two routes. So we have imported in switch. So we're going to go ahead and use the switch. And I'm going to put these in between it. Okay. At this point, we can go ahead and we can take away this header, well, the about and home that we had earlier. And let's just reformat this to kind of be on task with our objective here, which is to have the header and footer stay the same, but the stuff in the middle switch up, and for the URL address to address and reflect in text that switch. So we have that there. And now what we need to do is in here, we need to do a with router. So it's exporting the main component with router attached to it. And we're going to save it up. And we will have an error now, but let's go ahead and take a look. Should be saving up. There it is. And there you go. So now it's telling us that we're missing something. And from experience, I already know what we're missing, but I just wanted to show you that there is more to this that we need to add for the router to work. So if I now go into app.js, what I'll need to do is from here, because this is a parent in the hierarchy of components, we need to put something that wraps over everything else in our app. And what we'll need for that is we're going to have to import BrowserRouter from, we're going to React Router DOM. React Router DOM. All right, nice. Notice how we wrapped it in squigglies because we have to be specific. There's many modules in the React Router DOM. We want that one, all right? There is no default. Now in here, we're going to wrap the main component with this. So BrowserRouter, close it, and I'm going to put the main component within it, and I'm going to save it up. And we have header and footer, but nothing in between. So why? Well, let me show you something. If I go into the URL now and I type in home, you'll notice that home appears, right? Let's go ahead and change this end URL here, about, and it changes to about. That's really cool. But as an application loads, we may want it to go to a default location. And we're going to go ahead and set that up right now. So back in the main component now, we're going to go ahead and under our routes, we're going to do a default redirect to, I believe it's to /home. So whenever someone goes to just that default location, make this a self-closing tag. There's no harm in having both tags, but it really just keeps your code a little cleaner to have just one part of that with the self-closing and save it. Our user going to our application is going to need to be redirected to a location a lot of times. I mean, perhaps you can come up with some other clever ways of controlling that flow, but I've shown you how it automatically redirects now to home. So if we go 3000 like that, it'll redirect me to home. So that's pretty cool. We have the beginnings of our single page application, but let's get a little more complex with this. And let's say on each of those components, I want to start thinking about linking things because from my examples that I showed you earlier, there are links, like to do things. You're going to need to link to different parts of your application from views or pages, and we want to know how to do that. For example, I click on a picture and it links me to another sub view. The way I did this is a little more complex than I'm showing you right now, but the basics are ingrained in the method that I'm showing you with that middle section switching out and the URL reflecting some different information here in relation to what you're seeing. So let's go ahead and implement some stuff like that just to demonstrate that concept. So within the components that we have, home and about, let's first go to home. And what we are going to do is we are going to import a link from React Router DOM. And under here, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to use the link component. Again, I'm going to have this as a self-closing tag. And we want to link this to, for example, about. Okay? And make sure that you do the to as describing the path effectively. Now, we will need to wrap this in JS in a parent tag. So I'm going to go ahead and use a React fragment. React fragment, capital F. Put this stuff in between it. All right. And in a very similar way, I'll just go ahead and use this. In a very similar way in about, I want to have a link to home. And I want to be able to click it. Now, what I'm realizing now with the self-closing tag is I actually want some text to actually say, hey, click this stuff to go somewhere. Because as is, there isn't going to be anything, really explicitly telling the user to click on it. So I'll take away this self-closing tag, and I'm going to go ahead and create another link, but close out here like that. And I'm going to say, click here for home. Now I do have an error there, like so. All right, so there you go. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap this in a React fragment. And I'm going to go ahead and place this within it. I'm going to save it up. And because I just realized that a little bit late, I do need to do that over here too. I need the user to see some text about what's happening. So I'll have to create just the typical tag, close out like this with a description of where this will go. Click here for about. Awesome. I'm going to save this up. So right now, this file too also needs link to be imported because I will get an error if I don't import and say what the link component is. So I'm going to go ahead and import link from React Router DOM, and I'm going to save it up. So now when I go to my application and look at it, you'll see that I have links, and I click it, it goes to home. You'll notice the middle content changes. I clicked about, it goes to about. The link redirects me to the view I want to see. And that is what I wanted to show you, is how Create React App can get you started with creating a single page application quickly, and how by using the add-on React Router DOM, you can include links which ultimately will allow you to deploy a static website quickly. And there are many ways you can build an application, and perhaps React won't be your tool, but I do hope that you found some value in just seeing, if it was for your first time, or perhaps seeing it again and hearing it from someone with a different way of articulating it, what a single page application is, and how we can basically shift between the views. So good luck making your applications. I wish you all the best, and I really hope that you create a lot of interesting work and find a lot of success with your development work.